Hey everybody, I'm Emily, a designer at the Quilted Cow, and today I'm here to show you how to make this Quilted Cow exclusive pattern. It's called the Betsy Basket. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by Husqvarna Viking Machines, Creative Grids, Rulers, Cutters, and Mats, and the Wilmington Prince Fabrics. Okay, so let's get started. So first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Betsy Basket. It is also can be made into a Betsy Bassinet, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. This is a basket that we have had, a pattern that we have had in our store for a couple of years now and is very, very popular. We all love it. You can use it as decoration on your table. You can use it to hold sewing supplies in, whatever that you want to put in here. It is a great little basket. So head to our website, find yourself a fabric kit. The kit is going to include all the fabric that you need to make the basket. You will have to purchase the pattern separately, so make sure that you get the pattern. And then any interfacing that you're going to use in it, you're going to need your interfacing as well, so make sure you pick that up on our website as well. So let's get started with this basket. What I've done is I've cut my pieces to the size that it says in the pattern. So I cut my outside bag pieces first. This is the bottom, these are the panels that you see here, and these two are the top strips. I sewed them all together and I pressed all the seams pointing away from the bottom of the basket. So go ahead and do that. And then I grabbed some free fusible powder, just so that whenever I go to quilt my outside of my basket, when I quilt the fabric to the foam, using this powder is wonderful. It is a semi-permanent fusible powder, and what you're going to do is you're going to sprinkle it on. You take your iron and you give it about a 4-second press all over, and that's going to fuse the fabric on temporarily so that it sticks to the foam while you are quilting it. And it's great because everything will stay in place and your fabric won't shift around a whole lot. Now, you can quilt this as much as you'd like. Some people like to do a little crosshatch on the bottom part of the basket, leave the main part alone, and maybe do a little extra quilting on the top. It is completely up to you. I feel like, I didn't really need to do too much other than stitch in the ditch along each of the seam lines here. At this point, this is whenever I go ahead and I trim my foam. So my foam has been slightly oversized. I just grabbed a piece that this piece would fit on, fused it down, quilted it, everything like that. And I cut this lining already to the size that it's supposed to be. But to keep that from happening, if you need to, put your outside of your basket on top of your lining and make sure that you don't have extra lining outside of the basket. If you do, trim it off, make sure that you get rid of that extra fabric, because you're not going to like this project if you leave it the size that it says and the outside of your basket is a slight bit smaller than the lining is. So once we've got that finished, the next step is to go ahead and fold this in half. We're going to fold it lengthwise so that the top of the basket is going to match the top of the basket. This gets a little bit weird with the lining. So if you look at how the lining matched up with the outside of the basket, making sure it's the right size, we're going to fold that. So this edge and this edge are going to be the top, and these two are the sides. So we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch down the sides of the top and the side of the basket, or down the sides of the inside and the outside of the basket. One of the things I do like to do is match up where my seams are here. All right, so now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch down each side of the basket. So now I'm going to do the same thing with my lining, except on one side of the lining, I'm going to leave about 4 inches undone. Now I like to go ahead and stitch down about 1 inch and then make sure that the bottom couple of inches, 2 or 3 inches is stitched. So it's just right kind of in the middle, about 4 inches is going to not be stitched down. That's going to be our hole for turning this basket right side out. Once again though, go ahead and backstitch at the top and backstitch at your opening. All right, and then this other side is straight on down the side. Go ahead and stitch the whole thing all the way down. All right, so now we're going to box the corners. So let's go ahead and take a moment and remember that boxing the corners means that it's going to stand up like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the side. Before I do that though, I do want to make a note that there is no seam. Usually whenever we box the corners, we've got a seam on the side and a seam on the bottom, and that's going to give us our nice little guide. We match those seams together and everything's going to meet up nice. We don't have that this time to make sure that we've got the bottom. So I like to just give it a good finger press so I can see where that bottom would be on both sides of that fold. So then whenever I take the side seam, I can match it up with that finger press and make sure everything lines up that way. And that's going to give me a nice triangle, and it's going to make sure that that triangle stays in the middle of where it should be, in the middle of the bottom of the basket. If you don't do that, sometimes your triangle is going to be a little bit off and then your basket won't sit nice and flat. So I'm going to grab a slightly smaller ruler and I'm going to measure 2 inches from the point here. So I'm going to put my ruler on the line of the seam and put the 2-inch mark on the point, and that should basically give me and keep that line lined up, and the edges of my triangle are going to be on the inch marks here, so it makes it nice and even. So I'm just going to hold that down, give myself a mark across there. Sometimes it marks really well, sometimes not so much, but that's okay if it's not, as long as you can see the mark all the way across. And then whenever I stitch this down for the Betsy basket, I like to open up my seam here so that it's an open seam. So as I'm stitching, you'll see me open up the seam as I go along, and then at the tops, whenever I match up my tops, I'm going to open up the seams there. So keep that in mind. It's just a preference thing. You don't have to do it. You can go ahead and keep the seam laying to one side if you want. But once again, match up that finger press line with the seam. So I'm going to do the same thing to the outside of my basket that I just did to the inside. I'm going to finger press first. It's a little bit more difficult, so I press down a little harder with the foam, but that'll give me the idea of where that line, that bottom of the basket, is supposed to be. And then fold that over. Match up the 2-inch mark with the point, and make sure that the seam is in the center there. Give it a good mark. And then once again, whenever I sew this together, I am going to open up that seam in the middle. So now we're ready to go ahead and sew the corners. What you're going to do is you're going to sew on the line. I like to backstitch a little bit before and after. That way it reinforces the corners of the corner. Make sure that everything stays in place. All right, so now that we've got those all stitched down, all of our corners boxed, we're going to go ahead and cut off the extra fabric. And to do that, we're going to line up the 1/4-inch mark with the seam that we just sewed on there, and give it a good cut on all 4 of those boxed corners. So once we've got that, we're going to set this to the side for just a moment, and we're going to switch back and we're going to make the handles. So the handles are really pretty easy to make. I did put a little bit of lightweight interfacing inside of my handles just to give them a little bit of extra crispness. So I just cut out the same size of interfacing as the handle piece and just press that on there. Make sure that whenever you do a fusible and you put it on the back side of the fabric and the bumpy side goes towards the back side of the fabric, don't want to accidentally get the bumpy side up and put that all over your iron. So you're going to press down the center. You're going to match up wrong sides together. Lengthwise, press down the center. Once you get that done, you're going to open it back up and you're going to press those raw edges in towards the center fold. Once you get those done, press it in half again so that you've got a nice and closed raw edges there, and give it a good press. And you only have one piece of handle to do this to, because we're going to end up cutting this in half. Now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and top stitch 1/8 of an inch down to close this opening. And then I like to top stitch along the other side. And you can either lay this on your mat and use your rotary cutter and your ruler and do that, but I'm too lazy to count out how many inches I cut again. So I'm just going to fold it in half, grab my heavier scissors, and then just cut that in half right there. So now we've got both of our handles. Now, we've had some people that have made what they call the Betsy Bassinet. This is perfect for putting a doll baby in and having a little bassinet for your doll baby. If you're gonna do that, then you're gonna wanna place the handles on the side of the basket instead of on the ends. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to turn the outside of the bag right sides out, give a little push to those corners so that it stands up. And then I'm going to put my handles on the ends, and we're going to measure 1 inch from the seam on each end and place the handle on there. So I'm going to take my ruler and just hold that there, place the handle right on that edge, and then turn it. Make sure you don't flip it around. And then I'm going to measure 1 inch from the seam again. I hope you all can see that. So 1 inch from the seam again, and then place this handle just right there next to the ruler and go ahead and clip that in place. So the handle is kind of short. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a little bit of a stitching, an 1/8 inch stitch, just to base that on and keep it in place whenever we put the whole bag together. Let me get the other handle put on the other end. All right, so I'm going to take this over to my machine. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily have what's called a free arm on their machine. This machine, it is the Designer Ruby 90. It is a lovely machine and is really nice. It does have a free arm. What you're going to do is you're going to take the accessory case off, and that's going to allow you to access all the way around and be able to do baskets and bags and things like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my basket on that free arm portion. I hope that you can see this. And I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to base those handles in place. So I'm holding it with my fingers at this point, unclipping it, and then putting it down. And that free arm allows the basket to go underneath of the machine so I can stitch this on really, really nice. Okay, so that just gets the handle stuck in place so that we don't have to worry about those shifting around whenever we go to sew the whole thing together. So we're going to leave the lining right side, or wrong side out, sorry, right side in. And then the basket is going to stay right side out, and we're going to match the right sides together. So the right side of the lining is on the outside of the right side of the basket. And then we're going to, I like to open up the seam here. It does do well. It kind of reduces the bulk a little bit whenever it needs to be, and it helps to match up the seam a little bit right there. So I'm just going to clip that there and then push the bag inside of the lining. It's a little bit of a tight fit. That's okay. That's the beauty of the foam, is that it bends and it folds. Okay, so once you're finished kind of messing with it a little bit, get everything all nice and lined up, what you're going to do is you're going to come back and you're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way around the top of that. Once again, I'm using my free arm. If you don't have a free arm on your machine, you may have to load it in where the foam is on top and you're sewing that way. For me, it's a little bit easier to put it underneath and let it all crawl underneath the machine just like this. So 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. When you get to the handles, you will want to kind of straighten it out a little bit. That way it holds it where it needs to go. All right, so now we have our Betsy basket that's just wrong side out. So let's go ahead and bring it right side out. You're going to open up that hole in the lining, and slowly and carefully, if you go too fast, you try to put too much bulk through that hole, you can rip the stitches, so you don't want to do that. So just carefully going through and turning it right side out. All right. Now at this point, you can either take your machine, and if you have a coordinating thread color, I don't like to use a really, really dark thread on top, and just top stitch this open and closed right next to the opening. Or especially if you want it to look nice and neat, go ahead and pull out your hand needle, little needle and thread, and just whip stitch that closed. Once you've got that closed, go ahead and turn it all right side out. I like to grab my iron and give it a good press But if you give it a good press, that's going to give you a nice spot so that you can go back around and top stitch around the top. Make sure that that gives it a nice edge. You can do 1 row of top stitching, you can do a decorative stitch, you can do 2 rows of top stitching just right underneath. I usually do an 1/8 inch top stitch. Sometimes, depending on the basket, depending on what I want to do, I'll go ahead and add just another, so it's about a 1/4 inch from the top, and add another row of top stitching there. It makes a really nice look for this Betsy basket. So make sure you head on over to our website, grab yourself the pattern and the fabric kit. The pattern is sold separately, so make sure you get the pattern on its own. The pattern on its own, it's the Betsy basket. The fabric kit, we do have some available on our website. Check that out. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you keep getting our videos. And thank you so much for watching.
Okay, you wicked cool quilters, good job. You made it to the end. We would like to thank our sponsors, Husqvarna Viking Sewing Machines, Creative Grids, rulers, rotary cutters, and mats, and Wilmington Prints for the beautiful fabrics. Thanks for watching.